happy about that. I'd like to get the fire basket started, but if you don't have your Rotary can on today, how about put a little money in the fire basket? I'm going to give Bob Ward to return thanks for those dinner and membership.
Let's pray. Father, we're so thankful for you bringing us together again as friends and colleagues at East Chapel Hill Rotary. Keep us safe. Keep us ever mindful of the needs of others. Bless us through dry nourishment in us as always to thy service. Amen.
Thank you, Bob. Bob, for those of you that don't know me, I figured I am Mr. Rotary. Now that Roger Jennings is no longer with the club, I've decided to appoint myself as Mr. Rotary Jr. I think it's quite apropos. You know, I was probably the greatest Rotary secretary this club's ever had in 54 years. Wait a minute, I'm getting some discourse and feedback, but I'm just going to ignore it. Yes, back there in the back, sir.
I ain't told Roger Jennings I'm Mr. Rotary since he's retired.
Well, then, I'm sorry. I guess we'll just have to have a battle royale out. No, really. Glad to see everybody here today. Want to give a shout out to one of our members that just hit. Somebody told me he can't be 50 years old. I see him back there in the back with that red hair. Timmy, was it your birthday yesterday or you just trying to get sick? Well, they told me I had to tell a joke. I looked in the mirror and I didn't think y'all would get that one, so I brought one. A friend of mine's dog was walking down the street the other day, and down Main Street, and he saw a poster, and went, "This is Help on it." So he looked at it for a minute. He grabbed the poster in his mouth, and he walked in the store. The manager of the store come out and saw the dog standing there with the poster in his mouth. The dog dropped the poster down, looked at one of his head, looked at the manager. The manager says, "Well, we need you to be able to type, must be able to program, and you must be bilingual." He says, "You know, can you type?" So he got the dog up to a computer with a keyboard, walked out of the room. 30 minutes later, he came back in, and the dog had typed out a perfect letter for him. And the guy said, "Wow, this is incredible. This dog typed a letter." He said, "Well, to have this job, you got to program." He says, "Can you program?" So he walks out of the room. 30 minutes later, he comes back in. The dog's created a website for his business. It's Car Excellence. One touch, easy navigation. The guy's flabbergasted. He says, "Well, you know, I'd love to hire you, but you have to be bilingual." So the dog looks at him and he goes, "Meow." And with that, I'm going to turn it over to President Omar.
Bring back Roger.
How's everybody doing? All right. You don't have me back there? All right. Well, if you can't, then nothing I can do about it. We have any guests today? Anyone would like to present their guests? Phil.
I'm joined by my wife, Roberta.
Welcome, Roberta. Brian Swapneski.
I'm joined by my daughter, Helen.
Welcome, Helen. Jim.
I have my wife, Pam, who is back there. She's back there.
Welcome, Pam. Alan.
Next, I want to introduce Kim. He's with the UNC Healthcare and a former student of the professor.
Yes. JP.
I brought my two boys with me, Jack and Mason Perry.
Y'all don't mess with Sean Perry today. He's got bodyguards.
Right.
Yeah, is that Gavin?
Yeah. Close enough. Dan Howard. I brought my son, Kevin out.
Welcome, Kevin. Sorry, Dan. Ed.
I've got two guests, Jerry Lyle and Rob Green.
Welcome. Any visiting Rotarians? Okay, Linda Sanders has an announcement.
I do. Actually, I have two announcements. One is just a quick update on membership. So since the start of the Zen administration, we have onboarded 8 new members to the club. And then we have 4 in the pipeline that are on deck to be inducted within the next couple of weeks. So thank you for all of your proactive engagement and participation in making that happen. And then just a heads up, everybody hopefully will see an email from me that on the 29th of October, we will be having our next litter pickup along Estes Drive and other accompanying streets, and this is part of our quarterly commitment with the Department of Transportation. So certainly, please sign up. Any questions, let me know. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, membership team. The membership team is doing an amazing job recruiting new members. So thank you for all your effort, Linda, Jim, and everybody else. Last night we had a wonderful gathering. It was a pop-up at Stony River. It literally was a pop-up. You got the text about 2 hours before it was time to meet. So we still had a great turnout. We're going to keep doing that every few weeks. Next time we'll try and give you a little bit more notice. I didn't even know we were going to have a pop-up. Some people emailed me and said, is this real? That's when I sent out the email. The fundraising committee, we've talked about our fundraiser this year, which is going to be a raffle. It's going to be tied to the Chapel Hill Foundation Board 5K. They have about 2,000 people participate in their race. They have a huge email list of participants that have raced in the past. They also have the entire email list of the entire Chapel Hill Carver City School parents. So we hope to sell a lot of tickets, and most of that money is going to be going to the Teacher Supply Store next year. I am looking for people. We already have a fundraising committee, but I am looking for people who would be willing to work the day of the race. And what this will basically entail is having your phone or a laptop with a Wi-Fi signal, and just basically signing people up for raffle tickets. It'll be a very simple job. It's sometime in March. I don't know the date yet, but we'll give you more information as that date approaches. Again, we just need a wall of people, kind of like a telethon. We have a few birthdays that I'd like to recognize. We already know that Tim Smith turned the big 5-0 yesterday. We also have September 25th, Dickie Bedour. Felix, September 27th. Rob Krieg, September 29th, shares a birthday with Tim. And our own Jim Hebner has a birthday today. So everyone whose birthday it is, does anyone have any other announcements before I hand it off to our introducer? Jim, please. You'd like to do the honors.
So I felt great yesterday. And then this morning I woke up slobbering and I was having a hard time remembering things. Birthday things. That's why we don't do jokes, we just do stories. So when I first met, the first time I heard Jim Johnson speaking, it's probably been nearly 30 years ago. It was in some boardroom over here in the Exchange, and this incredible, bright young guy popped up on the stage, and he told his story with such blinding precision and such great engagement of the audience, and told us things that we needed to know. And I thought, God, this guy is amazing. I saw we recruited him from UCLA, and I said, clearly this kid was some child of Ivy League privilege, and we just went out and bought him because we couldn't have raised him. And so then I, over time, looked into his background and found out that he was born in Falkland. And that troubled me a little bit, Jim, because I realized then that you couldn't run for president because Donald Trump would say you were not born in America. And then I realized that Falkland is a little town in eastern North Carolina, down below Greenville, and it has a population of 96. And he is easily the biggest star to ever come out of that town. And as you can see in your biography today, I actually did not know until just this month that he started out in a segregated school and wound up coming out of Falkland to get his degree at NCTU, and then went on to major league at Michigan State, I believe. Jim went on to Michigan State to do his master's and PhD, and then somehow we got him here, where he has been an incredible star for a business school, a great ambassador for the university. And as you will see, for those of you who have not heard him, he has a remarkable way to take big stories that are complicated and difficult to understand, and makes it possible for all of us to come away doing so. So on that note, please welcome, if you will, Dr. James Johnson.
Good afternoon. Y'all better speak. I walked over here in the rain. Come on. I'm delighted to be with you. I'm delighted to be with you this echo.
You can use a hand mic, Jim?
Sure. Is that better? Okay, terrific. Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you. In the midst of the pandemic, two things happened. One, the 2020 census results appeared. Every 10 years we conduct a full enumeration of our population. That appeared. And more recently, the post-2020 population estimates for...
Sorry, Jim. Houston, we have a problem.
The post-2020 census population estimates for the period April 1st, 2020 to July 1st, 2021 appeared. Good people, that's the first 15 months of the pandemic. And so what I want to do is weave together our lessons from the 2020 census and our experiences during the pandemic. And I want to talk about it under this context, issue a warning to you that there's some demographic wind gusts ahead. This is not a political presentation. Demography is one of the most predictable things in the world. I guarantee you, if you're 5 years old today, 5 years from now, you're gonna be 10 years old. Your birthday comes the same time every year. You just add 1 to what it was last year, and voila, you got it. In fact, I can't wait for my annual review every year, because I walk into my dean and says, when we met last year, I was 67 years old. You know what? I'm 68 now, and next year when we meet, I'm going to be 69. It's called forecasting. I'm the best in the business. I want to talk about North Carolina's experience in the last decade and then 15 months of the first pandemic. We'll talk about this concept where there's some demographic winners and losers out there. And then I want to run you through really quickly those 7 gale force demographic wind gusts that we're going to have to buckle our seatbelts to deal with. You can view this presentation as enabling you to see around the corner well before you get there, because these things are fairly predictable. They're not debatable, just like your age, unless you tell a lie. I mean, it's not debatable. And then we can talk about the key takeaways. Let's talk about North Carolina's population boom. We are all that in a bag of chips plus dip demographic. We're one of the most attractive places in the country when it comes to demography, and the story of North Carolina is really rooted in the story of the southern United States. Those states in red on this graphic to the left, you all know your history. For much of the 20th century, it was an economically backwards region. It had all kinds of racial problems, and demographically, what that meant was it was the place to leave as opposed to the place to be or to remain, and lots of people did that. We had 2 great waves of out-migration in and around World War I, the second one in and around World War II, and as a consequence of that turbulent history, If you look at the data very carefully, what you will see from about to the right-hand side, from 1910 to about 1970, the South only captured about 30% of net population growth every decade. And the reason for that was more people were leaving than were coming. To the extent that the region grew, it was an excess of births over deaths. And then something profound occurred. In every decade since 1970, the South has captured about half of net national population growth in this country. We've gone from a region where we speak 2 languages, English and bad English, to one today we speak well over 300 languages. We have become demographically the cat's meow in terms of destination selection. If you look at the 2010 to 2020 period, we added 22.7 million people to our population in this country. 51% of that growth concentrated in the South, here in our region of the country. And if you look at this data very carefully, what you will find is that the South is the only region that is experiencing net in-migration from every other region of the country. No other region has that experience. You see that again, 2010, 2015, 572,000 net movers from the Northeast, 299,000 net movers from the Midwest, and 257,000 net movers from the West to the South. All of that is transforming the composition of our population. And if you look to the right on this graphic, what you will see is that the South is the only region where everybody is moving to in larger numbers than leaving. Whether you talk about non-Hispanic whites, you talk about blacks, you talk about Asians, Hispanics, the elderly, the native-born, the foreign-born, everybody moving here in larger numbers than leaving. No other region fits that suite of situation. The only other region that had any net in-migration of a particular group was the West region. More Asians were moving there in larger numbers than were leaving. In the Midwest, it was a Hispanic population moving there in larger numbers than were leaving. And the Northeast was kind of like when the last person leaves, please turn off the lights if they're still on there. This profound redistribution of population that is transforming our community. And so again, 22.7 million people nationally added to our population, a growth rate of 7.4%. The South got 51% of that growth, growing at 10.2%. The second most rapidly growing region was the West. Very, very slow growth in the Northeast and the Midwest. It's this profound redistribution of population from the Northeast and the Midwest to the West and the South, and tag, we are it in terms of destination selection and all the things that happen. But I lied to you. My good friend Jim didn't tell you I was a big liar. I said it's the South. It's really not the South. This is about 5 states within the South. This is about Texas. It's about Florida. It's about Georgia. It's about North Carolina. And it's about Virginia. We call them migration magnet states because of that 11.7 million people, 79% of that growth concentrated in those states. 2 of them are mature immigrant gateways, Texas and Florida. The other 3 are these newly emerging migration magnets, immigration magnets, having a profound transformation. Doesn't mean the other 7 states aren't growing. They're not growing like those 5 states. They captured about 21% of growth during that period. So tag, we're it here in North Carolina. If you look at the data very carefully from 2017, lower right-hand corner, what you will see is that North Carolina was the 3rd most attractive migration destination in the country. Every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year in 2017, we got 194 net newcomers arriving in North Carolina every day. Florida and Arizona. And where were they coming from? New York was losing about 458 people every day. Illinois was losing 395. California losing 378. Go down the list. That's where you got origin and destination in terms of the kinds of changes that we found ourselves in the midst of during that period. If you look at close to the entire decade, 2010 to 2018, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, 151 newcomers arriving in North Carolina. That's smoking by any imagination in terms of destination selection, the number of people arriving in our state. Where are they coming from? Everywhere. Everywhere. Large metro areas, medium-sized metro areas, small metro areas, micropolitan communities, in literally every state in the United States. That doesn't even include the ones moving from abroad directly here. It's that profound kind of change that we are experiencing in terms of our change. So if you take a long-range view and bring it back to move back to 1990 and bring it forward, what you will see is that North Carolina has added 3.8 million people since 1990, a 59% growth rate in terms of the kinds of changes that we're experiencing here. We are a dramatically different state than we were much earlier in terms of the kind of change we find ourselves in. What's driving growth? Look at our immigrant population. Back in the 1960s, we had about 22,000 foreign people in the state of North Carolina. It remained kind of slow until the 1990s. Then you see that huge takeoff. I haven't even had time to update this graphic. It was 824,000 foreign born. Today it's well over 1 million. I just looked at the numbers before I came over here earlier this morning. About 1 million people who are foreign born. And we've moved from a black-white state to a far more diverse kind of community in terms of what's happening. What's driving growth? It's the immigrant population, it's the Hispanic, Latinx population, it's Asian population, Pacific Islander. Everybody is growing, but that's what's driving growth in our state in terms of the changes that we are experiencing here. You may not know this, but when you file your income taxes every year, the IRS is on your case. And particularly if you've moved, they create a migration file. Let's say you file your taxes in one year, you live in Orange County, and next year you're in somewhere in Virginia, you're counted as a migrant. And they also know your adjusted gross income and a number of exemptions, so I can compute the adjusted per capita income that you have. And we do it by age. And so look at the migrants that are coming to North Carolina. The left-hand box are people moving into North Carolina. The middle box are people who are leaving. And the far box are people who had the same address in 2 periods. They're called non-migrants, okay? So let's just look at the 55 plus population. What you will see in this graphic is that the typical household, family, taxpayer, applicant, whatever you want to call it, typical 55-year-old had an adjusted per capita gross income of $63,546. Okay? The person leaving in that same age group had an adjusted gross income of about $57,000. And the person who didn't move, a non-mover who was here above this, had an adjusted per capita income of $48,000. Now, I'm no mathematician, but my math says the difference between the person who didn't move and the person coming in is about $15,000. Okay? I'm still not a mathematician, but what my enumerations say is that the difference between the person leaving and the person coming in is about $7,000. What does that mean? It means that we get high value add migrants moving here that have an impact on business revenue and taxes and all of those things. That's the kind of stuff that you want, you know. People got juice. And it doesn't matter what age group you look at across those, that is the rule. The people coming in have more per capita income than the people who are leaving and also than the people who are living here at that time. Unfortunately, all of this excitement and growth is not evenly distributed. We got demographic winners and losers. If you look at the data very carefully, we added 903,000 people, it's 904,000 people to our population between 2010 and 2020 in North Carolina. 47% of that growth was in 2 counties, Wake and the great state of Mecklenburg. 64% of that growth was in 5 counties. 84% of that growth was in 15 counties, and 95% of that growth was in the rest. You can get lulled to sleep living in a triangle area. Because the question is, what happened in the rest of the counties out there? What's driving that growth? All them snowbirds coming in, settling in those high growth counties. Those are the ones moving from New York. Now, some of those people in New York get confused and they leave and go to Florida. And they figure out it's hot as all the time down there. So they come back to North Carolina. They're called halfbacks. They're halfway back to New York. But we benefit from all of that. Unfortunately, so we got 15 counties growing like crazy or growing relatively. Concentrated growth. Focus on the counties on the purple on this. I won't spend a lot of time. In those counties, deaths exceed births and out-migration exceeds in-migration, okay? When your deaths exceed births and out-migration exceeds in-migration, you're literally a dying county. Demographically, you are dying. These are places where hospitals are closing or at risk of closing, where birthing centers have shut down. There's one of those counties up there, if you have a stroke in that county, you got an hour and a half to get to a hospital. You're only as strong as your weakest link, okay? In all of this. We have 65 counties in North Carolina where deaths exceed births in the total population. Those counties in red up there, okay? We have 85 counties where deaths exceed births among the non-Hispanic white population. In these counties, the only viable business is the undertaker. I saw him the other day, he 85. I don't know who gonna bury him. That was 2010 to 2020. What's happened since that during the pandemic? The South, another close to 1 million people moved to the South. All those pandemic refugees who headed south. And all of our growth during that period, that 959,000 people, 94% of it was due to migration. So it's all these people who are coming in that's, driving change in our community. And so if you look at where growth occurred, this population of the United States grew by, under 500,000 or 0.1%. It was the South that was growing at 0.8%. So that 900 was the Northeast was losing, the Midwest was losing, and the West only added 78,000 people in that 15-month period. That's almost insignificant in terms of the kinds of changes that we're talking about here. And again, it's everybody moving south, demographically, race and ethnicity-wise. The West Coast got some elderly people. That's mostly migration to Arizona for that net migration. But now, not only do you have to turn the lights off in the Northeast, you got to turn them off in the Midwest too. It's this profound redistribution of population that we're seeing and experiencing here. We're benefiting. Today, it's no longer 5 states, it's 4 states. It's Texas, Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. They captured 84% of that growth during the pandemic, and we're in the middle of all of that. We captured about 11% of it, that kind of change. And so if you add North Carolina to the mix, you see that we're growing rate-wise, relatively much more rapidly than any other region of the country. We're still at all that magnitudes plus dip and whatever else you want to add to it. Whatever you're drinking, it's there in terms of destination selection. This is the interesting part. I told you that we had about 191 newcomers every day for the last decade. During the first 15 months of the pandemic, 253 newcomers every day moving to North Carolina, 253. Florida had 678 every day. And Texas had about 532 every day. New York was losing 923, California was losing 923, close to 1,000 people every day. New York was losing 861, Illinois 324, you go down the list. You begin to see what was happening. All those movers we call pandemic refugees fleeing, high density settled urban communities, looking for safer havens. And all of that growth in North Carolina, most of those places was big migration, not excess of births over deaths. It was migration-driven, people coming in from other places. 100% of the growth here in North Carolina was all due to migration during the pandemic. You see the impact of so many people coming in because 47% of growth was in 2 counties, right? During the last decade, but you see this 50% of that growth during the pandemic was in about 5 or 6 counties, 74% in about 15. There are about 26 counties up here now that were growing rapidly. What happened? People were moving in so fast and the prices were going up so high that, first of all, places like Durham and Raleigh, prices escalated. You only have so much land to develop and the like. So the spillover growth occurred in the other surrounding counties and the like. And so that's what happened. So you're seeing some spillover growth during the pandemic because of the large number of people arriving. I live in Chatham County, and in my neighborhood, one of my neighbors was a football coach at Carolina who left and went to coach in Florida. And his wife was walking the dog one day, and I was out in the yard, and she said, we put our house on the market yesterday morning at 9:15, and she said 9:30 we had 5 full price offers for the house. And she said, and we were scheduled to have an open house the next day. And she said one of the suitors offered them $50,000 cash above the asking price not to have the open house the next day. She continued to walk her dog. I ran down to her house, took the sign out of her yard, and put it in my But that gives you some sense of what's going on in the marketplace. Yes.
I'm surprised that Orange County is not on here with all the growth occurring.
Well, it's not occurring here. Orange is not. He said he was surprised Orange County's on it. Orange is not growing, it's part of the Durham metropolitan area. Durham is not growing anymore, and Orange is not growing. Price everybody out. 58% of the growth in the Durham MSA is in Chatham County. The other remaining growth is in Vance County. Yeah, got people going 2 directions. Let me get to it. Here. So that was your growth right there. That's what. And you got some micropolitan area. It's basically amenity-rich places and nice centers where y'all can have nice meals and nice place where you see screens all around. That's their growth. But here's the problem. What happened when you had all these pandemic refugees move in and descend on these places? What happened to the price of housing? It went up. One of the studies that we did looking at the impact of the pandemic, one guy out west said, wow, do we need affordable housing? If people flee in the city, every house that's for sale is gone. Outsiders are buying these houses sight unseen. They're coming here, they don't even go into their home, they're buying them online, and they're fleeing the city. I got people in New York, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Florida, they all coming here. There's no affordable housing. That was a problem before the pandemic. Now it's a real problem. Another guy said, we have $1 billion in residential real estate in the high country region for the year 2020. He talks about where the people are coming from. He says, so while, in the short term, we got some economic flow into our county, particularly if you were a real estate agent or a construction worker, you were doing okay, but long term, that's just going to make a hard issue that is affordable housing even worse. One other guy said, what I've seen, our population change. We were a population of about 17,800, 8 golf courses and 2 ski resorts. All these people that are normally not here fled the city and came to their homes in the mountains. So our population probably is 27,000 people, and that did put a strain on services that the county provided. He went on to talk about the impact on his solid waste operation. He said, because all these people come in, the first thing they want to do is gut the house and dump everything on the side of the street. And then all of you who are on lockdown and all the accumulated things for 400 years, you decided to clean up during the pandemic. And so his people couldn't keep up. He didn't have the staff. It just put a heck of a lot of pressure on But the problem that we have today is we are pricing out of markets the very people whose job it is to protect public health and safety and educate our kids. Police officers, fire personnel, EMS workers, public school teachers, and nurses. You may not know, but we built a school for vulnerable children in Durham. Even before the pandemic, one year I had 4 homeless teachers at the school. Everybody with a master's degree. Can't afford to live in these places. That's the challenge that we have that comes with all of the growth that we're experiencing. Yes?
I think a lot of private investors are buying up that housing stock and taking them off the market and renting them.
Silencing.
So the inventory of available houses is really good.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And all of these big companies that are recruiting, they're buying for their workers also. Got that going on. So, as if that wasn't enough, the 2020 census had some interesting dynamics in it that I want to share with you really quickly. Slower total and foreign-born population growth, white population loss, below replacement level fertility, depths of despair, involuntary retirements of the 55 and older population, and declining labor force participation of women that I think you need to be mindful of. Number one, slower population growth, Air Force Wind number 1. This is a graphic of a 100-year look at growth rates by decade in the United States. What you will note in this graphic is that U.S., in terms of the rate of population growth, peaked in 1960 when we grew at 18.5%. You will note further that since then, what has it been? It's been some perturbation, but slower growth in every decade, such that in the last decade, 2010 to 2020, we had the second slowest rate of growth in our history. The slowest rate of growth was during the Great Depression. We grew at 7.4% between 2010 and 2020. We grew at 7.3% during the Great Depression. And so the question is, have fun now? Because it's not going to last. It's not going to last. If you look at in absolute numbers, left-hand side of the graphic, we peaked in terms of absolute growth in the 1990s when the nation grew by 32.7 million people. But if you look at it over time, it's done what? Progressively slower growth from 32.7 down to 27.3. Most recent growth, 22.7 million people. If you look at North Carolina, on the right-hand side of the graphic, we grew by 21%, 1.4 million. In the 90s, we grew about the same rate, a little bit higher, during the 2000, first decade of new millennium, 18%, but we only grew by 9.5% in the last decade. What that suggests to me, my numbers again, is that we grew by 500,000 people fewer in the last decade than we did in the preceding 2 decades. It's this slowing total population growth that we have to be mindful of going forward. And part of that slower growth has to do with immigration and foreign-born population in our country. If you look at on the left-hand side of this graphic, we grew in terms of the foreign-born population by 57% during the 90s. It dropped to 24% during the first decade of the new millennium. 2010 to 2019, it dropped down to 13.7%. And during the Trump presidency, it dropped to 2.7%. If you look at North Carolina, you see a similar trend, a similar pattern. Now, why is this important? We know that immigration is a selective process, right? First of all, immigration is an age-selective process. Far more young people migrate and immigrate than older people. That means old people don't move. They move slower and at a lower propensity than young folk. There's one more piece to this story. Don't you all repeat this anywhere, because you could. Y'all ain't got no job, but you could lose it if you had one. Young people are more likely to have children than old folks. And so When you slow down immigration, it has larger implications for overall growth in your population. So that foreign-born growth is the big thing. But the big thing that nobody expected and anticipated, although I could see it coming, and you will see it in the data, for the first time in history, in the last decade, the non-Hispanic white population actually declined in the United States. It declined by 5.1 million people. It declined by 2.6%. You could see it coming, though, if you looked at the earlier decades. Because what happened during the 1990s? White population grew by 3.4% or 6.4 million. It dropped to 1.2% in the first decade of the new millennium, and then it declined by 5.1 million. Now, in North Carolina, the white population didn't decline, but we experienced slow growth. We're headed there. Just wait, it's going to happen. We grew by 13%. White population grew by 13%. It dropped to 10%. It grew by 1.4%, or 88,000 people in the last decade. That's what's driving that slowing growth in our population, part of the reason. So 19% whites contributed 20% to growth in the 90s, 8% in the 2000s, 0 because it was lost. So all of that 22.7 million people we added to the population occurred among people of color because you got a declining white population. And it doesn't matter what region of the country you look at, the white population declined in every region of the country.
Question.
Yes?
Is it part of that to go how they count the white population? So let's say you have
Non-Hispanic white, this is what this is.
Well, but what I'm saying is if you have a white son marry a Hispanic.
No, that's mixed.
That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
their kids are counted as white or Hispanic.
But that, no, yeah, they're counted as a mix. The mixed race population actually was the most rapidly growing population, grew by 276%. Yeah, absolutely. These are non-Hispanic white only. It's the only part. 35 states lost white population, all the ones in red on this graphic. Only 15 states, including North Carolina, plus the District of Columbia, experienced white population growth during the last decade. And so this is one of the profound drivers in everything that we know. If you look at the 15 months during the pandemic, I don't have it on this graphic, I didn't put that table in, but the non-Hispanic white population in the U.S. declined by another 1.1 million during the pandemic. Here in North Carolina, you see the non-Hispanic white population grew by 31,000 people. That's because you got all those pandemic refugees coming in. We benefited from that, but still 70-some% of growth in the state occurred among people of color. And so we're a far more diverse population and the key to our future. Part of the reason that we are not that growth is slowing is fertility rates are down. In a statistical sense, if you are a couple, you need to have 2.1 kids to replace yourself. Okay? Don't ask me about the 0.1. It's got to be rocking and rolling when you do it. Okay? That's the total replacement level. That's our order to grow. Okay? If the total replacement level is 2.1, who's replacing themselves in America? You got one group.
Native Hawaiian.
Native Pacific Island, very small base. We have had the low replacement level fertility in the United States since 2008. Okay? If you're not adding to the gene pool on the front end, what happens to the upper end? It gets older. It gets older. Now, why are you all not doing your job?
See, that's an easy question.
Well, part of it is a function of the increasing role of women in the labor market and in the workforce. Ladies, what happened when y'all decided to become all educated and career-oriented? And what typically happens then? What happens to the age of marriage? It goes up. As the age of marriage goes up, what happens to the age of first childbirth? Goes up. When those two things go up, what happens to the biological clock? You're constraining the biological clock, and so it reduces the fertility rate, okay? And so as women move into the labor market, you see these impacts on fertility. It depresses. Women end up having fewer children. All you got to do is look at your family. Go back to your grandma. She had 400 kids. Your mama had 99, and you may have one. Or increasingly, we have a whole group of women who are opting out of childbearing altogether. They're called the voluntary childless population. Again, you're not adding to the burden. And then there's a group of women who are aging out of the childbearing years. Let me give you a quick demography lesson. I'm not going to give you the big theorem. If you want that, come up the road. Give us a couple 100,000. There's something called completed fertility, ladies. It's when you tell your husband, go take out the trash, ain't nothing else happening here. Completed fertility for women occurs between the ages of 40 and 44. There's this precipitous drop in fertility. The median age of a non-Hispanic white female in America is 45 years old. Median age of a Hispanic female is 30. Okay? And other women of color between those two ranges. It's a very predictable thing. Okay. Now I know some of y'all in your voice, I'm going home and fix this tonight. Go ahead. Leave now. You need a ride? I'll give you one. You might go home and squeeze out one, but you're not going to do what a 30-year-old can do. So, this is the thing that we need to understand. If I told you completed fertility, the last time we had above replacement fertility was in 2008. If we had above replacement fertility to be maintained between 2009 and 2019, we would have had about 5.8 million more kids in America than we have today. And those are the groups that you see that change. So understand that this has something to do with slower population growth. The other thing that has something to do with slower population growth are deaths of despair. What am I talking about here? I'm talking about deaths due to suicide, alcohol, drug, and now the coronavirus related deaths that are really creating a demographic depression in our country and in our state. That's what the drug overdose crisis looked at, drug overdose for deaths per 100,000 people in 1999. That's what it looked like in 2014. 11,000 people hospitalized daily and well over 100 deaths every day. Bring it home closer, 2017, 158,000 deaths of despair, the equivalent of 3 fully loaded Boeing 737 MAX jets falling out of the sky every day for a year. Okay. On the left-hand side, who are these people? They tend to be prime working age people, 25 to 44, most of them with less than a college education. Now, you all, I know you understand when somebody tells you that Social Security is a pay-as-you-go system, right? Means you're paying in and somebody else is spending your money, right? Because it's a pay-as-you-go system. What needs to happen for us old fuddy-duddies to get some money out of the system?
Need more.
Them young people need to be working every day, EBDAY. 3-4 jobs to pay into the system, but you got a whole demographic depression here where those people are dying prematurely at a much too young age. Look at North Carolina. In 2018, we distributed 445 million opioid pills in North Carolina. Okay. How many deaths, overdose deaths? 5 a day. 5 a day. How many people in hospital emergency departments? 18 a day. And how many people did we bring back to life? With the not so long reverse, about 10 people every day.
You have to leave there, it's interesting.
Only you would pick that up.
What are you trying to say?
So that would be like, if you looked at it on a per capita basis, 43 people per capita, 43 pills per person. But if you look at it And again, remember that these things occur mostly among people 25 to 44 with less than a college degree. Think red, think orange, high rates of those people. But if you got a total full black dot in your county, the per capita number of appeals is between 70 and 110 appeals. Okay? Distributed on a daily basis.
Has that been dropping between then and now, or just
Let me get to it. And so COVID and these things, a couple of things. First of all, COVID reduced life expectancy in America by about 1.1 years across the entire population. It reduced life expectancy among whites by 0.7 of a year. Among Latinos, it reduced life expectancy by 3 years. And among African Americans, it reduced life expectancy by 2 years. Why? People in vulnerable jobs, exposures, and all of that kind of stuff, reducing life expectancy. 90,000 drug overdose deaths in 2020. 30% increase over the death code in 2019. One drug expert said it's the biggest increase in overdose deaths in our history. What happened? All those people who were struggling with opioids and the like on lockdown couldn't get to their counselors, and their sickness just proved to be a deadly experience. Well over 900,000 deaths since 1990, since the late 1990s. 100,000 deaths in 2021. And here in North Carolina, we have 59% increase in, a 60% increase in deaths between 2019 and 2021. Overdose. 1,400 more people died, and 3,600 more people ended up in emergency departments, and about 40% increase in those reversals with all that kind of stuff, to give you some sense of what we're talking about. Now, you all remember, y'all remember the New York blackout back in the day? What typically happens?
9 months later.
He got me. When you lock down, what usually happens 9 months later? There's a baby boom, right? Y'all get busy doing that. It did not happen during the pandemic. Remember, the pandemic started in March, so you should see impacts in November, December. 40,000 fewer births than would have been anticipated in the absence of a pandemic. Okay? And we now think 300,000 fewer births in 2021. We don't have the hard numbers yet, but that's the forecast of 300,000 fewer births. Again, if you're not adding to the front end of your life course, the top end gets older and the number of population shrinks in terms of what's going on. The early study showed, because of all those deaths in the pandemic, one of the first studies showed that there were 144,000 kids who were orphaned during the pandemic. 122,000 lost their primary care giver, and 22,000 lost their secondary caregiver. About 15% increase in orphan children during this time. That study, that's just a picture of what kids had to deal with. Globally, the early study said that there were 5 million kids globally who were orphaned during the pandemic. A couple of days ago, a new study came out. 10.5 million kids globally orphaned, and 550,000 here in the United States orphaned as a function of the pandemic. Decline in female labor force participation in voluntary child. A couple of things in there. 1.7 million workers 55 or older forced into involuntary retirement during the pandemic. They didn't want to retire, had no choice. With a median savings of $9,000. Okay? Median savings of $9,000. And then As this woman we interviewed in the middle of the pandemic about the burden of the pandemic on women, she says, and no offense to all the guys on this Zoom, the pandemic has really been detrimental to women. The majority of the burden has been placed on not only the schooling, the child care, the nutrition. It's a lot. I've seen women cry, just like, I'm just so tired, I don't know what to do. An estimated 2 million women forced out of the workforce during the pandemic. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to you that we struggle with labor challenges today, because you know what? Those women can't go back to work until we fix the child care crisis. Because what happened to all those child care facilities during the pandemic, many of them went belly up. They couldn't work. In one of the counties in North Carolina we're working in right now, Chick-fil-A can't open until 4 o'clock every day because they can't get workers. And the only reason they open at 4 is that some kids get out of high school and they can go to work at that particular point. And so these are the issues that we're confronted with. And even people who are still in the labor market, we estimate that about 20% of them today, 1 in 5 workers, are balancing paid work with part-time care duties, putting them at high risk of resigning. They call it invisible overtime. All of these caregiver responsibilities that folks have today. And so, you know, everybody who's arrogant and pompous about return to office mandates, it's not working for these people. Because you got 2 problems. They got the caregiving responsibility, and they're being pushed further and further away from where they work, they live and work. They're called super commuters. It's not working for them. It's not working for them. And so, now that I'm sufficiently depressed, y'all, what do we do? What do we do? A couple of things really quickly. Understand that the projections of slowing population growth are continuing. That's not a minor perturbation or aberration. It's going to continue. Okay. So what do we need to do? I think to deal with the great resignation and our labor shortages, I think we have to audit all our businesses to make sure that they're more inclusive and equitable places to work. Something we call in our work reputational equity. Firms got to have more reputational equity, because one thing the lockdown did, it enabled people to reflect on their existence and what was important to them in life, and they're willing to make choices. And the younger generation will quit a job in a New York minute without another one and say, move over, I'm coming back home. I would never think of doing it. First of all, they wouldn't let me in, but those kind of things. Secondly, I don't see how we can survive, thrive, and prosper moving forward without a sane immigration reform policy. We got slowing total population growth, we got declining fertility, we got deaths of despair. Right? If you can't reproduce it, where you get it from? You gotta import it. You gotta import it. We gotta encourage family-friendly business policies so women can have children and be able to have the flexibility to support them. Plain and simple. Because something I didn't talk about in here is we have a whole generation of men that have given up on college. The sex ratio in higher education has been 60% female, 40% male for 3 decades. Between 2014 and 2019 at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, we granted 45,000 more degrees to women than we did men. What does that mean? We got a lot of women who don't have eligible, marriageable male partners if they want to marry at a comparable education level. And so we got to make things work for women. That's another thing with declining fertility, because if you don't have an eligible, marriageable male pool, who wants a hanger-on? We have to attack the child care crisis head on. 45% of the US population lives in a child care desert. There's not enough child care spaces for the children who live there. Gotta fix that. And these deaths of despair are really a function of what we call the social determinants of health. When you look at your health, only about 20% of your health outcomes is due to your genetics. The other 80% is based on your zip code. Your zip code should not determine your life outcomes. We gotta fix that. And until we reframe it as a competitiveness issue for us, we're gonna be a rebuild. And lastly, you know those people who were forced out of the labor market involuntarily, they're the boomer generation. That's the hardest working generation there is. We gotta figure out how to get them back. So encore careers and encore entrepreneurship opportunities for those folks. We gotta get them back into the labor market because that's the only way. We need every one of them, literally, the thing that we're doing. We can fix this. Just gotta have the will to do it. Gotta have the will to do it. And it requires us to reframe these issues as competitive issues. We're gonna lose our shirt in the global marketplace. You're gonna win on talent. And that's what all of this is about. It's about the next generation of talent to propel our nation moving forward. Thank y'all.
Jim Hebner.
Okay, glad to take yours. Great show. Since it's my birthday, I'm going to ask 2 questions. First of all, going from the macro to the micro, for 50 years in Chapel Hill, we've had a publicly acknowledged suppression of growth. And now we have an epidemic, whatever we want to call it. We've got more apartments being built in Chapel Hill right now that are tax-friendly and will have to somehow lower the cost of being able to live in Chapel Hill. How do you see that changing the demography and economy of our town? And then the second part is, if you are here in Chapel Hill and you're looking in your opportunity years, how might we take what you have talked about here today and look for opportunities?
The first question, I am deeply concerned about overbuilding. Okay, I'm deeply concerned about that for the demographic reasons. I think in higher education, in K-12 and higher education, if you got declining fertility, where's your next generation gonna come from? There's a sharp decline. Now, I think one of our opportunities, and I think this is, we were relying on out-of-state talent, but sooner or later that dog won't hunt. Because declining fertility is not just concentrated somewhere. Look, declining fertility is a global phenomenon. China had for what? The one-child policy. Now it's coming home to catch up with them. I mean, so you've got these issues. So I think that's one issue. The other issue, I think, is the opportunity that we have. I mean, I think it's something like we've recruited 6 firms that are going to bring 18,500 jobs to the state. Most of them concentrated here in the Triangle area. That doesn't include the employment opportunities related to the development so that those things can thrive. We have a huge opportunity here to create a more inclusive and equitable entrepreneurship and small business ecosystem so that we have greater share of prosperity, so that people can afford to live in the places that they work in. One of my best friends at the business school commutes 100 miles round trip every day for a housekeeper's job. Can't afford to live here. Gotta fix it. We can't just bury our head in the sand and say, that's the case.
On the deaths of despair that we were speaking about and how it's been increasing, I was just wondering if one factor might come into play, even a small amount of that number, and that's the introduction of fentanyl to the opiate.
That's the big thing now. It's like M&Ms. They're all colors. Yeah. So that's that. It's not so much the prescription thing now because we clamped down on it. It is the fentanyl laced with all other kinds of stuff that give you about 30 seconds to live.
Good. Is growth an absolute?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, do we have to increase things all the while? At some point, do we start to run into the limits of the planet? Blah, blah, blah.
I don't think growth is at that level that we should be worried about the limits of the planet. What I do think is that we have some problems with climate change and how we distribute population. One of the interesting, I just started working on it last night, like 3 o'clock this morning, I was watching the news. All of those communities that got wiped out in Florida, those were destinations for pandemic refugees running away from the pandemic. And so the real question moving forward is what will climate migration look like? Because we got a bunch of climate refugees now. I think it's a distributional issue. I don't think it's the size of growth, because growth is down. I mean, we're just not producing the way we have in the past.
We have a question.
If that makes sense to you.
Jim,
yes.
Obviously immigration is a big part of your solution. Do you have any idea, information, statistics on the economic impact of migration, whether immigrants drag down the economy because of social costs or add to the growth of the economy?
Good question.
Jim, I'll take that mic.
I'm glad you asked. We actually, my colleague Jack Cassard and I actually did the first study of the economic impact of Hispanic immigrants in North Carolina, because everybody would say immigrants cost more than they contribute. And they just start, people just start like in church, shaking their heads. So where's the data? Let me give you one statistic. One of the things you hear a lot is that they're a burden on the healthcare system, right? Median age of a Hispanic is 29. What kind of major health problems do you have when you're 29? And the median age of the US population is 45. And when you're 29, you may have acute crisis like sticking your finger in a lawnmower and you gotta go get it glued back home. But when you're in your 40s, it moves from acute to what? Chronic. Which one costs the most? I know I lost my wife to cancer at 48 years old. Her treatment the last 6 months of life, $5,000 a week. Makes no sense. And what we found is, for every dollar the state spent for K-12 education, healthcare, and corrections, it gets $11 back in business revenue and taxes from immigrants. Why? Because you hear that they don't pay taxes. Well, if you are a renter in the housing market, any landlord that's got common sense is going to pass part of the property tax onto you in the rent. If he isn't, I got some oceanfront property in Missouri for him. And if you drive up to the gas pump, are you not paying taxes? The framework, people don't look at it the way it is. You take immigrants out of the market. There's this group that says that multiculturalism is ruining the South and that everybody ought to be forced to leave except white Christians. And so we did this study and said, let's assume you get your wish. We took everybody demographically out of the South but them. Median age goes from 30-some to 48. In one county, it goes from 29 to 69. There are 46 occupations that disappear. About 16 congressional districts disappear because people of color, 40-some% of the population. And I did this because I'm facetious. I said, now, what do y'all think is going to happen to the Southeast Athletic Conference? 80% of be careful what you ask. It makes no sense. It's utter foolishness. Yes.
What kind of overlap is there, or research is there to talk about marriage rates and reproduction?
Jim, if you'll repeat that.
So he wants to know about the overlap of marriage rates and reproduction.
We've heard in the club the last few months how the rate of people in countries that are religious is dropping, church attendance is dropping. We've heard about climate change, and then we've heard about deaths and despair. And I'm trying to think, there's probably something within all of these working together.
Yeah. So we have one of the most rapidly growing, talking about marriage. First of all, marrying out is in. Okay. Marrying out is in. Okay. The greatest marriage now rates are among people who don't belong to the same racial ethnic group. You know, until 1967, it was even illegal for blacks and white men. So that increase in the 2 or more race population reflects those out marriage patterns. But we also see, not just in the US, but globally, the emergence of households called DINKs. Double income, no kids. So people are making conscious decisions not to have kids. And so, I mean, it's a change that we're seeing in society, or they're making the decision to have fewer children. Right? Now, what's underneath all of that? The cost of the child, and you know, even if you dual income, sometimes it can be a challenge. Particularly if you're talking about multiple kids in the household and the like. But there's no question it's a complex kind of issue. But at the end of the day, it's just a cultural shift in our society, and it comes with development.
Hey, Jim, we have time for one more question. If you
Tell them, not me.
Yeah, well, if you'd like to keep, answering questions, that's up to you. I'd like to respect your time. People are obviously enjoying what you have to say.
Sure.
Well, first of all, let me say we have 5 children, so we're not responsible. Can't blame me.
Where's the point 1?
Second, as we look across your slides and we think about the state and the uneven distribution of economic opportunity, as a matter of policy, should the state be investing in Lumberton County to improve the conditions down there, or should we be trying to bring people into the economic centers where the opportunity exists? So the opportunity go to the people, should the people go to the opportunity?
We don't have, but first of all, y'all gonna fight everybody that comes in here, so that's not the most reasonable thing to do. And you run out of space and you run out of places to go. We gotta figure out how to, first of all, incent people to move to those places. There are so many folks now that are paying people who are remote workers to come to their communities. If you are a remote worker, Tulsa, Oklahoma will pay you $10,000 to move there. You can keep your job wherever you are. International countries are doing that. The incenting people to move. We incent businesses to move. Why can't we incent people to move? And there's never been a better time to do it now in some of these rural counties. Why? Because they got these aging folk have parents, I have children and grandchildren that have gone away and have done really, really well. And now it's time to come home. That's how I ended up back in North Carolina. Because my grandmother had reached a point where she couldn't take care of herself. After me being away for 20 years, time for me to come home. That's a cultural thing, I had the good fortune of, as Jim talked about, having an offer from Chapel Hill, but that was the issue.
You mean it wasn't us?
Huh?
It wasn't us?
No. I didn't figure out us until I got here. Where's the boss?
Right there.
Okay.
Right there.
So,
Get you, Matt.
about the elephant in the room, you've left out the political process. So talk to me about how you get the politicians to believe.
I told you, we have to change the narrative.
Well, but how do we do that? I mean, everybody goes around and says, we need to change the narrative. Nobody's changing.
I just told you. Well, no, you have to change the narrative and to turn people are not moved by moral appeals. They only understand, and let's agree on it, they only understand the bottom line, the dollar.
Yeah.
And so my thing is, if you don't deal with these issues, and we're in an information economy where the rule of the game is talent, you're gonna lose your shirt. Plain and simple, you're gonna lose your shirt. Last time I looked, you know, here's my favorite one. When people like our age who say they don't want their taxes raised to educate other people's kids. I ain't got no kid in there. I'm trying to get to Aruba. What I say to you is, you know, yes, I don't have a dog in that fight, they say. So yes, you do. It's called the future competitiveness of our nation. But more to the point, sooner or later, you're going to age to the level that somebody's got to take care of your old butt. You do want them to be able to read your prescriptions and count your pills. I can show you there's a whole generation out there that can't read prescriptions and count your pills today. That's a competitiveness issue at the end of the day.
Can I ask you a question?
No, pretty much.
Jeff, sorry.
We've been hearing a lot about the immigration over the south borders. What effect have you been able to measure that effect in North Carolina versus the country?
Well, unless somebody's busing them here, it doesn't work. Right? It doesn't work. Usually when you're a place like North Carolina, it's a network phenomenon. Remember that the immigration wave here started in the 90s, so, and Mexican immigration is down. These are people from Venezuela and other places. Yeah. And so, and they are refugees. They're not illegal immigrants. We need a lesson in the pool of people who are coming because we tend to lump everybody together. And refugees are radically different from illegal immigrants. First of all, many of them are professionals in their homeland. They're fleeing persecution. They're not fleeing, economic crisis. And those are people you really want because they can hit the ground running. So I think until we understand how valuable that labor is, and if there's a silver lining in the current hurricane and all of the devastation, we're going to need talent to fix that as quickly as possible. Hopefully some people will come to their senses and understand that dynamic.
All right.